Hello, my name is Nathan Ahunsera, and this is my final presentation for network design. My topic for discussion is BitTorrent. Now, before jumping right into what BitTorrent is specifically, I think it'd be wise to go over uh, file sharing on the internet in general first. Now, I'm sure you know what downloading means, but it's basically just a term used to describe the process of receiving data from the internet. Typically, the process involves computers, called clients, querying some data from another remote computer, the host, and that host responding to the query with the expected data. This means of downloading is referred to as FTP, or standing for File Transfer Protocol, and is by far the most common way to download things on the net. If you've clicked on a big download button, like the big black one you see on the right there, and found your file nicely saved in a download folder on your machine afterwards, you were probably using FTP. With FTP, typically the relationship is one host and several clients, like your PC, your smartphone, your laptop, connecting to YouTube or something. Uh, this works really well in most cases, but the burden is always on the host to provide enough bandwidth. That is the amount of data that can be sent over connection at a time. That's what bandwidth means. To ensure that all the clients can access the data from the host in a timely manner. This works very well if your system is small or if you have enough funds to afford higher bandwidth. But what happens in cases that don't fall in these neat boxes? What do you do when the host isn't able to provide significant bandwidth? Well, if your host can't survive significant bandwidth and you're using FTP, all you'll have is network congestion. Basically, what's going to happen is you're going to have much slower download times and a very spotty connection. Luckily, someone by the name of Bram Cohen was thinking of the same thing in the early 2000s, and so BitTorrent was born, a protocol that allowed for each node in the system to act as both a host and a client simultaneously. Now, before going into the technical details of BitTorrent, I thought it'd be fun to go over, a bit of its history briefly. Like I mentioned in the previous slide, it was authored by a guy named Bram Cohen, a very intelligent person. According to him, he started programming at age 5, using BASIC on his dad's computer. So yeah, flashing forward a little bit in his life, he attended college, dropped out a couple of years later, and then surfed around different companies involved in the dot-com boom of the mid to late 90s. He eventually found himself at the now long defunct Mojo Nation, precursor to modern crypto, an industry that he's actually trying to get back into as of late. But yeah, it's not important. After he left Mojo Nation, he ended up using his experience from working on their systems to make BitTorrent in April of 2001. He released a fully available state of the protocol in July of the following year. All right, now onto the technical details. BitTorrent differs from traditional FTP file sharing in that it is a peer-to-peer or P2P protocol. Now what this means is that instead of one host delivering the content to multiple clients, each device sharing via BitTorrent acts as both a host and a client for the same content. Now, the way this works is like this. Initially, when a file is being shared by a computer using BitTorrent, that file on the initial machine is broken into several smaller portions called pieces and sent to other computers requesting it. This computer, called a seed, sends these to other computers called peers who wish to access it. As these pieces arrive to these peers, they in turn become seeds themselves, contributing to the group effort of maintaining the swarm, as it's called, providing these pieces to other peers who may want them. Now, communication between these peers is facilitated by what is known as a torrent tracker, basically a server, private or public, that contains information about individual peers, to help them communicate with each other better. Now, most of the popular ones you see around are public, I guess by their very nature, like all the ones that I have listed here, like the Pirate Bay, 1337X, and Open BitTorrent. Now, in the past, torrent trackers were vital for the use of the BitTorrent protocol, but in recent years, through the creation of DHT, or the distributed hash table, you don't really need trackers, or they're not absolutely necessary for communication between peers. So it's a lot more decentralized now than it used to be. Torrenting is not natively supported by most web browsers, so usually an application known as a BitTorrent client is required to gain access to these torrents. I have 4 examples posted up right here. I say don't choose uTorrent because I personally do not like it very much. It seems mostly like adware to me. QBitTorrent is the one that I personally use. Very low weight. I like it. WebTorrent is an alternative for people who do not want to download things, and BitTorrent is the client provided by the company who made the standard. So it is seen as the official BitTorrent client. Okay, before moving on, because of all of the new terms that I've sort of spat at you, I think it'd be best to review some important concepts associated with torrenting that we've covered so far. Peers are simply all of the file sharing nodes on the protocol. Generally speaking, peers both download and upload data. That is, they act as both hosts and clients. But there are specific terms that are used to describe peers that excel at doing one of those two things. First, seeders are, the good Samaritans of the BitTorrent ecosystem. When a peer has finished downloading all the pieces to the file it wishes to acquire, but keeps the torrent active to supply other users its pieces, that user or machine is known as a seeder. A leecher, on the flip side, is used to describe peers that have not yet finished downloading a file. Now, colloquially, a peer that intentionally throttles upload speed and cuts off a torrent as soon as it completes is also known as a leecher. But I assure you, leechers, in the technical sense, are a very vital organ in the BitTorrent ecosystem. Now, all active peers are collectively referred to as the swarm, and they use BitTorrent clients to communicate and share with each other, while using a server known as the tracker to facilitate the file sharing of that swarm. Now, like I mentioned earlier, trackers are becoming less and less relevant as even BitTorrent becomes more and more decentralized. Okay, so let's talk about some benefits. Why do we care? Why do we want to use BitTorrent in generally? Now, the decentralized nature of BitTorrent does come with a lot of benefits. For example, if you're downloading something that you really want, no one person can take that ability away from you from accessing this file. So if for some reason the provider of this file becomes defunct, as long as there are peers available to pass it on to other peers, it'll basically never go away. For this reason, it's really good for preserving popular files, because as long as there is a seeder available, or as long as people want the file and are sharing the file, it'll always be there. There's also no bottlenecking from any host because there is no singular host. With FTP, your download speed is limited by how fast, or the bandwidth of the host. In this case, your download speed is limited by the fastest peer. And so with FTP, the more clients, the worse the connection. In using BitTorrent, it's actually the reverse case. You want as many peers as possible because then you have more options to choose from when selecting the pieces that you will download. All right, let's talk about the negatives. All right, you'll notice that I put decentralized twice, and that's because it really depends on what your perspective is. Say for example, I uploaded a torrent to some BitTorrent tracker somewhere, and I regretted my decision and I wanted to pull it from the internet. Sure, I could ask that tracker to stop hosting my torrent, But as long as there's a seeder somewhere who wants my torrent to be shared, it'll be shared, and there's really not much I can do about that. Um, Another disadvantage of BitTorrent is that it's pretty bad for preserving things that are unpopular. Uh, there are a lot of cases where there's a particularly unpopular torrent that only has a couple seeders, and so you are limited by whatever the bandwidth is of that specific seeder. If you are in a situation like this where there's very few seeders and a lot of leechers, FTP tends to be the preferred option. And the third, which is related to the first reason, is that it tends to be a copyright nightmare. Say, for example, I am a copyright holder, I make some content, say a video game or a movie, and I want someone to take this content down. With FTP, I can simply contact the host, serve them some papers, and bam, my copyrighted content is no longer available on their servers. But because there is no one centralized server in BitTorrent, it's not as simple. I can't really contact the tracker because you could just keep sharing it on your own or move to another publicly available tracker, of which there are many. Uh, Expanding a bit on that disadvantage, because of this notoriety that BitTorrent has for piracy, uh, peer-to-peer file sharing tends to be throttled by a lot of ISPs globally, specifically in America and Germany, and also Switzerland. ISPs tend to come pretty hard on people using BitTorrent. Um, a fun fact that I like to share related to legal troubles and peer-to-peer file sharing is that PTP software is partially responsible for the prevalence of music streaming today. Your Spotify's, your Apple Music's, because in the mid 2000s there was a debacle involving a lot of the holders to the copyrights of popular music. Uh, Sales of physical media started to dwindle because of the prevalence of file sharing through BitTorrent and other peer-to-peer um, protocols. And so, in response to this, because these physical media weren't selling as well, they just decided to have their media just available for a subscription. And so, convenience ended up winning the day, I guess. And now we have streaming services. Very cool. And I assume that video streaming then stemmed off from music streaming, but that's just a pipe theory from my head. In recent times, torrenting has steadily fallen in popularity, seeing its peak in the early 2010s, and hasn't reached that high since. Though, despite this, there are still 28 million people torrenting daily, and as of 2013, it makes about half of all internet bandwidth, for file sharing specifically. I know that sounds like a lot, but it still pales in comparison to the billions of people still downloading things the traditional way. Though this may just be a symptom of the lacking of mass adoption of BitTorrent due to its connections with piracy. Despite this, companies like Activision Blizzard do use PTP for certain downloads, and sites like Wikipedia and the Internet Archive have their entire catalog available via torrent, relying on users to lighten the load of direct downloads, that is, using FTP, congesting their servers. Alright, now that we've basically reached the end of the presentation, I'd like to wrap up by reviewing some summary questions. First, what is BitTorrent? BitTorrent is a PTP, peer-to-peer, file transfer protocol that decentralizes the file sharing process. How does it work? Files are broken down into pieces and shared between computers, called peers, as they are available. This communication is usually facilitated by a BitTorrent client and a torrent tracker. When is it useful? In situations where you have low bandwidth but many clients. And lastly, BitTorrent or FTP? This question is more subjective. And at the end of the day, it really all depends on what your current use is and what utility you'll get out of either client. At the end of the day, choose what works best for you. Alright, well, thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. Have a good one.